Welcome into the Football Guys Fantasy Football Show. It's week 12. I'm Alfredo Brown, joined as always. I got Dave Kluge, and we got a special guest this week, Jagger May from the Football Guys Dynasty Show. Today, we're going to be going over some running backs that we want to stash for the fantasy playoffs. And Dave, we mentioned this last week. We know the standard trade deadline for many people was last week, but there are some teams that still have a trade deadline this week. So we are going to have a trade candidate in here as well.
Yeah, and if we're talking dynasty leagues, of course, if you're playing in dynasty leagues, those shouldn't have trade deadlines. I'm in other leagues where it's kind of a moving trade deadline based on your chances of making the playoffs. Like once you're less than 5%, then you're banned from trading. Well, people who are still active. So I know every single league is different. So even though the standard trade deadline was last week, there's a lot of leagues out there that are still allowing trades.
I love that moving trade deadline thing. That's a lot for a commissioner to handle, but I agree. It's like, all right, buddy, you ain't going to go anywhere. So you're done.
So we do that in our home league because it is a keeper league. So you can also trade for keepers that have more value going year over year. And that's every single Tuesday morning. I have to run the playoff odds and say, well, sorry, Peter, you are less than 5% chance of making the playoffs. You're done. And Brian, you're at 3% chance of making the playoffs. You're done. And we just every single week have to reassess who can and can't trade.
Are those your actual friends' name? Are they like stock names, or did you just pull those out?
Oh, if I showed you the list of names in this, a very basic group of white men from the Midwest, yeah.
Just loving the stock photo friends: Brian, Peter, Scott, Paul.
No, I'm going through it right now. Brian, Peter, Ben, Troy, Ryan. Yeah, it's very standard.
Troy sounds ethnic.
Nope, sorry. You just watched too much Community.
All right, so what we're going to do here today is, like we said, we're going to talk about some running backs you should be stashing for the fantasy playoffs. We're going to go through 6 names here, maybe some other honorable mentions that we didn't quite pick up on. But before we do that, I just want to remind you guys that you can enjoy this show here on YouTube. And if you're watching, please take a second to like this video, comment down below with some running back questions you might have, and be sure to subscribe to the channel because we're giving you episodes all throughout the rest of the season here. We've got the Sunday morning live start sit, and Dave and I are going to be back every single week giving you waiver wire and start sit advice here on the channel. And if you're listening on the podcast, take a second, leave a review, 5 stars preferably, and just give us your honest feedback, what you like about the shows, maybe some of your favorite episodes. We love to get that feedback from you guys. So, all right, let's do this. Let's jump into the running backs. Jagger, you're the special guest. Kick us off with your first running back to stash for the fantasy playoffs.
The guy that we weren't wrong, we were just 14 weeks late on, is Jonathon Brooks. I joke, but seriously, I think now's the time to pick him up. Chuba Hubbard is going to have his own role, but it's important to look at the Detroit Lions model backfield, and they kind of have this yin and yang thing, and a lot of teams want that. And it's clear that Jonathon Brooks is going to be at least used as a receiver, because I don't know why they would spend that early of a pick on him. So I'm not saying you're going to plug him right away in your lineup, but you want to get him now before we start to see that usage and the rest of your league catches up on the same thing, because a lot of people are just done with him at this point.
Yeah, Alfredo and I, we just talked about this last week, and that's really what I see. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous comparing anybody to David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. Yeah. What they're doing right now is unbelievable, but this is definitely a diet version of that, a low-carb version, whatever you want to call it.
Linda.
Yeah, we got the erythritol version down in Carolina, but I think that they'll still be, there's going to be a complementary skill set there. And I think Chuba is going to get a lot of the early down work, a lot of the goal line work. But you look at what Jonathon Brooks did in college. I've talked about this a lot, but he was second in the league in yards per route run behind only Travion Henderson last year. So he is a very skilled pass catcher that can rip off those big plays. There was hope that Chuba Hubbard would just kind of fall by the wayside and Jonathon Brooks would take over with this Todd Gurley type of workload. I don't think that's going to happen, but the good news is that he is so explosive that he can still pay off and give you weekly upside, even if he's getting 10 to 12 touches. And then Chuba Hubbard, he'll be even fresher if Jonathon Brooks is spelling him a little bit, meaning that he'll play better. So I think that him returning, it's not going to be the same upside we'd hoped for in the preseason, but I think both of these guys can still be very effective playing with each other.
Agreed.
Man, Jonathon Brooks, if just he even has one good week in the fantasy playoffs, every single person that was saying he's a league winner, well, you're going to be right, kind of.
I got the tweet queued up right now. I'm just ready.
Just sitting there in the drafts. We're waiting for you, week 17, Jonathon Brooks blow-up game.
And if he gets
All
3
right.
snaps next week, I'm just retiring. I'm done. You'll never see me again.
That'll be it for Dave. All right. Dave, why don't you give us your running back that you want to stash, not named Jonathon Brooks?
So this one is more of a trade. You're not going to find Rachaad White available on any waiver wires out there, but this is a guy that, when you talk about him with anybody, you just see like the immediate disgust where people are like, ugh, Rachaad White. And I get it. Like, he was drafted in the second, third round in a lot of leagues. He was a top 5 running back last year, and we're not seeing that same production this year, but he still is a very, very viable guy that you can put into your fantasy lineup. Top 25 in weighted opportunities. He's not getting the same opportunity share that he did see last year, but he is still getting a lot of the passing down work and a lot of the goal line work, and that's where his production comes from. Bucky Irving is undoubtedly the better runner. Like, you watch what he can do with the ball. He can do things that Rachaad White can't, but Rachaad White, because he's still getting those high value touches, does, in my opinion, still have a lot of value. And then you start looking at his schedule for the rest of the season, and that's what really excites me. And of course, we're talking about players here that you can stash for the remainder of the season. According to the Footballguys strength of schedule tool, Tampa Bay has the best remaining schedule for running backs. And you look, week 15, the first week of the playoffs is going to be a little bit difficult going up against the Chargers. But then in week 16, he's got Dallas. And in week 17, he's got Carolina. Those are the top 2 matchups that running backs can get. And you're getting Rachaad White potentially in week 16 and 17, the semifinals and finals of the fantasy playoffs, with 2 smash matchups here. So if there's still a trade deadline pending and you can go out and try to buy low on Rachaad White, even if the production is going to be kind of back end RB2 over the next few weeks, we could be looking at RB1 upside when it matters most.
Yep, I agree. Hutch, our guy does our shorts, made a similar comment on there, and I was like, good for you, Hutch. That actually makes a lot of sense. Again, it's like these yin and yang backfields. Rachaad White gets the high leverage touches, like catches and whatnot.
And there's so few edges in fantasy football nowadays because everybody's making content and everybody's consuming a lot of the same content. I think the one way that you can still kind of get an edge is just looking a few weeks ahead. So many people right now are just focused on this week and trying to set week 12 lineups around their buys. But if you have the foresight to start looking ahead at weeks 15, 16, and 17 matchups, which is what we're trying to do on this Wednesday series here, that's where you can still get a little bit of an edge by planning ahead of what your league mates are doing.
Mm-hmm.
You're muted, Alfredo. I remember my first podcast.
Yeah, I'm new here. I'll say this. We're talking about Rachaad White and the Bucs backfield and how easy that schedule is going forward. If you can't trade for Rachaad White or you can't trade for Bucky Irving, there's also a pretty good shot that Sean Tucker is still available on your waiver wire. And depending on how deep your bench is, whatever your thoughts might be on Sean Tucker, because I saw Jagger's face just like glaze over right now, because I know you're not a Sean Tucker guy, right?
No, I don't think he's good at all.
Yeah. And that's the thing is like I don't think Rachaad White is very good, but I think that's kind of the thing you have to do here is when it comes to fantasy, we do have to sometimes put that aside because if the usage ends up being there, it can be big. And so if there is an injury to Rachaad White or Bucky Irving, I think Sean Tucker jumps into a big role for the Buccaneers with that easy schedule. So I think there's just a lot of good options here. I think it ended up being a blessing in disguise that we were kind of upset about a 2 or 3 man backfield here, but now as the year goes on, any one of these guys could end up being a big time league winner.
Yeah, and I think this is, since this is a running back show, I'll bring it up. And I've said it a lot over the last few weeks, but this is the time of year where you can stop holding on to those wide receiver 5s. If you're wish casting a breakout going into week 13, it's probably not going to happen. So, the Dontavian Wickses and the Mike Williams and the Adam Thielens and these types of guys that you're still holding on to, those are the types of guys that you just drop for a Sean Tucker, who's an injury away from huge upside rather than an injury away from maybe being a weekly wide receiver 3.
Yeah, and that's a really good point that even in Dynasty, I saw Sean Tucker getting dropped. And even for that, I was just like, well, that's a little presumptuous, especially with those deeper rosters.
Dave, you said it, I believe 2 weeks ago, that basically everyone's bench should just look like a stable of backup running backs at this point, unless you have some really high quality wide receiver stashes. But essentially, that's what we should be looking like for everyone's bench. If you're in the running for a playoff spot, it should be all these backup running backs that are an injury away from being a league winner. All you're doing is you're buying more lottery tickets. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
All right, next up. I know if you're watching this, you're looking for an edge against your league mates. You're looking for a way to get to the fantasy playoffs, win in the fantasy playoffs. You want that extra advantage. I got you. It's not necessarily a player, but it's our Black Friday sale. We are giving you 20% off the Football Guys subscription for a year's worth of subscription. You like that, Jagger? You like how I just mixed that
Yeah,
in?
that's good.
Yes.
Smooth.
Surprise, got you. It's an ad. But you're also going to get 20% off of Football Guys merch. Like this hat that I'm wearing here. Jagger's got a really sweet Football Guys jean jacket with some fluffy stuff up around the neck. It doesn't get cold here, so I can't really buy that. But we have some awesome Football Guys merch, and you'll see us wearing that every once in a while. The link for that is going to be in the description down below. 20% off your Football Guys subscription for the year. All right, back to our regularly scheduled programming. I'm going to give you my running back. It's Trey Benson, running back for the Arizona Cardinals. He's available in 79% of leagues, which is honestly shocking at this point. What are we doing that this guy is available in nearly 80% of leagues? It's not like he's a guy that's just hanging out on the bench and not doing anything. Like he's actually getting a decent role in this offense where we're seeing it grow week in and week out, and nothing is changing because there's always that one random player that happens to have a really good week, and we say, oh, well, he's the new waiver wire pickup. And I think, Dave, you and I have kind of not ignored Trey Benson, but we assumed more people would be picking him up. So let's leave him off of the waiver wire shows. And it's just, there's no movement there. Absolutely no movement. Like there's a similar rostership for Trey Benson and Khalil Herbert. Khalil Herbert has one touch over the last 2 games. And Trey Benson has been out here performing better and better every single week. And for Arizona, they've got the 3rd easiest playoff strength of schedule for a fantasy running back. We already know James Conner, 30 years old. He's gotten nicked up here and there. He missed 4 games last season, missed 4 games the year before that. And Trey Benson, I think the biggest thing here too is we talked about running backs that we're not necessarily big fans of because they haven't looked good or they may not actually be as talented as we think. Trey Benson has looked like a completely different player in the second half of the season. I think throughout the first 4 or 5 weeks, he just looked very skittish, a little scared, trying to bounce everything outside. Now, all of a sudden, he looks much better. He looks a bit more like his college tape.
Yeah, and it was week 10, that matchup against the Jets, where he really, really took that huge step forward. And that was when I saw him getting downhill a lot quicker. He was so indecisive early in the season. We talked about that a lot, where it was just pitter patter feet in the backfield, couldn't really make a decision. And then by the time he would make a decision, he was getting gobbled up for a 3-yard loss. And then it was that week 10 game where we saw him just one cut, turning it upfield, breaking tackles, running through defenders, all the things that he has the size to do and seems scared to do early in the season. But then in week 11, there was a bye. So I think a lot of people didn't want to pick up a player who had a pending bye. A lot of people dropped him during that bye week. So he's still available in all these leagues, which is crazy to me because you look at how good this offense has been for the last few weeks for the Cardinals. You look at how effective James Conner has been in this role. We know that Trey Benson probably isn't going to have a lot of standalone value, but of all of the handcuffed running backs out there, if the opportunity presents itself for Trey Benson, a young and talented player on this offense, I don't think there's a handcuff out there that has more upside than Trey Benson does.
Yeah, it's a instant RB1 upside if there happens to be an injury or something. And I know what it is for people. James Conner's been reliable, and he's been a steadfast, set it and forget it type player, and that's fine. But people are looking at Trey Benson getting touches in just because of a blowout as a negative, when really you should see is like, oh, this young guy that we spent day 2 draft capital can handle some stuff. And we talk about usage a lot on the Dynasty Show. We know that Jonathan Gannon is a defensive coach. What do defensive coaches and those old school guys do? When they get up, they are going to run the football. So again, with an easy running back schedule, that should just be juicy for Trey Benson. Like, okay, James Conner, all right, go take a seat, old man. We'll let the young buck close out this game. So yes, especially with that schedule, the answer should be both of them.
Yeah, and if thank you, love the callback there, Jagger. But I will say, like, if for whatever reason James Conner does have to miss time, again, I'm going back to that Carolina matchup, Week 16. I talked about it earlier when I was talking about Rachaad White, but the Cardinals face off against the Panthers in Week 16, and if for whatever reason, James Conner misses on average 4 games per year and is yet to miss one this year. If he ends up not being able to play for whatever reason in Week 16, Trey Benson is a top 5 running back in weekly rankings. Like if there's no James Conner on that offense against Carolina, we're probably looking at 25, 30 points from Trey Benson in that matchup.
I mean, even if James Conner does play, I think that Trey Benson is one of those guys you can even consider as an RB3 or flex play at that point. Because they likely do get ahead in that game and need someone to run it out. Also, like there's just it doesn't have to be such an insurance policy thing where, oh, James Conner gets hurt. Now Trey Benson has value. We're getting towards the end of the year here where the Cardinals are in the pole position right now in the NFC West. Like, they are leading that division. They're going to be fighting for a playoff spot. And if they want to win games in the playoffs, they're likely going to want to give their running back a little bit of rest and keep letting Trey Benson get more and more work. And Jagger, you mentioned about the Cardinals getting ahead and then giving the work to Trey Benson, how that's not a bad thing. And you're absolutely right. Like, let's just read the tea leaves here. They give him a bunch of work. There's a bye week. Now they know this is what he can do with all of this work. Let's continue to explore new ways to use him in the game plan. So Trey Benson, to me, not only does he have that huge contingent upside as an insurance policy, but he's a guy that actually could start to see closer to 50% of the work as we get here towards the end of the season.
Yep.
All right, Jag, go ahead and give us your second running back that you think is a mustache for the fantasy football playoffs.
I have to give Alfredo and Dave credit. They're way more in the redraft trenches. So I asked for help and I'm like, what is even going on the waiver wires? And then when Alfredo showed me that Ray Davis was an option, I gasped. I was like, what? I was like, what? What are we doing here, folks? 73% of leagues. I have a roster with James Cook and Ray Davis on it. And I came to that conclusion 4 weeks ago, and I'm like, what do I do with these guys? And I keep saying it. It's both of them. I got James Cook in my RB1 spot, and I got Ray Davis in a flex, or depending what's going on. This is beyond what we've seen for Trey Benson. And I guess we thought we're fighting over who's going to get the targets when as Josh Allen's wide receiver. Now that Stephon Diggs is gone, the answer is that they're just going to run the ball with three. It's like, all right, we're going to have James Cook left, Ray Davis right, Josh Allen up the middle. All right, Keon Coleman, you'll get one. And then they're just going to keep doing that, especially if they get up. So if Ray Davis is an option, I would empty the clip on him, to be honest. Am I crazy for doing that? Just like dump your fab at this point.
No, I mean, you know us, Jagger. We are very big Ray Davis fans here, and he's looked great with his opportunities so far. And again, I mean, we're talking about a lot of guys that are an injury away on a good offense, and that's exactly what Ray Davis is. So yeah, that's a no-brainer. And again, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Like, there are leagues where people have Josh Palmer rostered and Ray Davis on the waivers.
Yep.
And like, that's crazy to me. Like, that's what you need to be doing at this point in the season, is trimming the fat from that wide receiver room, getting rid of your QB2, getting rid of your tight end 2, and forcing a guy like Ray Davis, who might not have a ton of standalone value, but the upside is there. That's what you want on your bench.
Mm-hmm.
Can I tell you guys one of my benches that I have? It's the Flex League, the league with like Jake Seeley and Joey Wright, Jamie Eisenberg, a couple of these guys. That bench is Ray Davis, Isaac Garindo, Khalil Herbert, Adam Thielen just came back off IR, Sean Tucker. It's a bunch of these names that we're talking about today. That's like, that's what you have to. And I have the number one spot in the league. I'm at the top of the standings right now. And all I want is a bunch of really good insurance policies on the bench.
Yeah, we'll throw some extra names out there at the end of the show that like we're not going to dive deep into, but yeah, I mean it's not rocket science. You get the young guy with athleticism who's an injury away from a big workload. Like this is an easy show to record because we just have endless opportunities, and we're trying to look at the schedule and the guys with the most upside. But there's a lot of these young running backs that you should be picking up and stashing now.
Yep.
Did you ever hear the you don't have to be a rocket surgeon?
I haven't heard that one.
I think that was like a George Bushism or one of someone said it like that.
I think that is Bush. That sounded like Bush. It's like, you don't got to be a rocket surgeon to be a president.
All right, Dave, hit us with your next rocket surgeon of a running back here.
I mean, we've talked about this guy a lot on this show already. I was wrong on Braelon Allen. I wasn't a huge fan of the prospect coming in, but he's played in the NFL like such a different player than we saw in college. You almost wonder if like he knew that he had put enough on tape his first year in college that he just didn't really try the rest of his tenure, knowing that he was going to get drafted and that he could play well, because he's looked really, really good this year. And he was starting to carve out a big role where he was forcing, about a 1-2 committee with Breece Hall. But since Jeff Ulbrich has taken over, Breece Hall has gone back more to his workhorse role, and we're not seeing quite as many touches from Braelon Allen. But again, this just comes down to contingent upside. If Breece Hall is to miss any time, great opportunity here for Braelon Allen, a guy that we've seen can look good at the NFL level. And then again, I will talk about his upcoming schedule here. He's got a bye week in week 12, so he's a guy who could be getting dropped by a lot of managers right now who are trying to field a lineup. But for the rest of the season, he has the second best remaining schedule and only has one matchup that we deem a negative matchup based on Football Guys strength of schedule tool. Seattle in week 13 is a plus matchup. Miami in week 14 is a plus matchup. Jacksonville in week 15 is a plus matchup, and then Buffalo in week 17 is a plus matchup. So if for whatever reason Breece Hall needs to miss any time here, Braelon Allen has a lot of good matchups down the stretch, a young player who can look good with the opportunity. Again, like all these guys we've talked about, not a ton of standalone value, but we're looking at guys that we can stash that have potential league-winning upside, and that's exactly what Braelon Allen has.
This episode is just a copy paste of like, if an injury happens, this guy could be pretty good.
I'm pretty sure we filmed this exact episode in the preseason, and we're just running it back right now going into week 12.
And it's probably 90% of the exact same people, except Jonathon Brooks got switched to a different episode. That's all.
Yeah.
By the way, as you were doing all that, I searched it up. Rocket surgery. That came from your boy, actually our boy, Dave Wannstedt, when he was coaching the Chicago Bears.
There you go. All right.
Post-game interview, he said it's not rocket surgery.
Love it. That's a Chicago legend right there.
Neil Wannstedt, man. Good times. All right. Well, actually, keeping that connection, going to the Dolphins, I'm going to give you my running back, Jaylen Wright, running back
and
for the Miami
stash.
Dolphins.
You want to stash Jaylen Wright.
Cut that. We're gonna cut that
part. Timestamp that for Julia. So,
Timestamp, cut it, redo it. All right, so back to this one. I'm gonna go with Jaylen Wright, running back for the Miami Dolphins. This is another one. It's surprising because the usage continues to increase. He's available in 85% of leagues, which, I mean, you may have your thoughts on Jaylen Wright as a player or even this Dolphins offense in general. But for a player whose role continues to increase on an offense that can put up points in this manner, being available in 85% of leagues just feels unacceptable at this point, especially at this time of season. The snaps have gone up, like I mentioned, 26% of the snaps in week 11. He was actually ahead of Raheem Mostert, which many people are still rostering, and some of us, like myself, have been forced to start him at a couple of times, and it does not feel good anymore. And honestly, I'm just ready to drop Raheem Mostert at this point, and I would drop him actually right now for a Jaylen Wright if he's on my waiver wire. Over the last 3 weeks, we've seen the rush attempts continue to increase. He's at 21% over there. And look, we go back to the same insurance policy thing. If De'Von Achane were to miss any time, it's not just that Jaylen Wright would go into a big running back role, but it's just such a massive role for touches in this offense. De'Von Achane has had an 18.5% target share since Tua has returned. So over these last 3 games, De'Von Achane is essentially the wide receiver 2, and in many ways, kind of the wide receiver 1 in terms of targets on this offense. Like, we're not really seeing the same Dolphins passing offense that we got to see last year. So De'Von Achane's 19 touches per game, with 5.5 of those being receptions, end up being available. Now, I know that's not how vacated targets work or vacated touches work, but the idea that Jaylen Wright could even walk into 13 or 14 touches per game with a decent schedule on a good offense is still incredibly valuable, and he should not be available in this many leagues.
Yeah, I mean, Raheem Mostert is following the steps of Mike Tyson and Third Eye Blind, just telling us that Father Time is undefeated. He has not looked like the same player the last few weeks, and we knew it was going to happen eventually. He's 32 years old, but he's playing pretty bad football right now, and I don't know if that's age or injury or what it is, but Jaylen Wright hasn't looked fantastic, but he has looked objectively better than Raheem Mostert, and I keep waiting for the change to be official, and it looks like we've seen it over the last couple of weeks now, where he just keeps carving out a bigger and bigger role, and I think he kind of is the RB2 now in this offense.
Yep. I mean, I said it all season that Jaylen Wright being drafted is not about De'Von Achane and everything to do with Raheem Mostert, because everyone's just like, well, he played so well and doesn't have touches. I'm like, you know how many touches I have in the NFL? 0, and my knees hurt, and I'm 32, dog. It's like that doesn't really matter.
I think like Raheem Mostert, I don't want to take away what he did last year. 31 years old, he put together a really good and prolific fantasy season. But it's not like he was playing great football. This wasn't the Raheem Mostert we saw 7 years ago ripping off 80-yard touchdowns. Yeah, it was just the team was scoring like crazy, and every single time they got near the red zone, they brought Raheem Mostert. And what was it, 22 touchdowns, 21 touchdowns, whatever it was crazy last year. And I think we all kind of knew that was unsustainable. And now we're starting to see that changing of the guard, where Jaylen Wright is taking over for Mostert.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, all these guys, I think we can make the same argument for each of them. It's just that there's already some standalone value there, and if those touches increase, it's just absolutely bananas. Guys, there are a few other players here to consider that we did not talk about today, and I'm going to list some of them, and just would love to hear if there is a player from this group that maybe both of you guys like or stands out to you. Blake Corum, Sean Tucker, Khalil Herbert, Isaac Garindo. Any of those guys move the needle for you?
Blake Orem, absolutely. He's
Yeah,
looked great the last couple of weeks. He had a nice little breakaway run last week. I hate that I'm still saying this after a year and a half. Like he just keeps making me look like an idiot. But like Kyron Williams is, he's good at picking up 5 to 8 yards, but he doesn't have the breakaway speed or the explosive abilities that a guy like Blake Corum could. And Sean McVay is hellbent on giving the ball to Kyron Williams, which is awesome. Kyron Williams has the value and he's there, but I think that if Kyron Williams goes down and Blake Corum gets plugged into his role, the ceiling with Blake Corum in that role is so much higher than the ceiling we're currently seeing with Kyron Williams.
agreed, 100%.
My question here is, I mean, we already talked about Sean Tucker a little bit. Isaac Garindo kind of feels like he's become an afterthought when in reality it did feel a little bit like he took that RB2 role away from Jordan Mason. We're not really seeing that. Both these guys got 5% of the snaps, and it's just full on Christian McCaffrey show. If McCaffrey happens to go down again, and I'm not hoping for that or wishing for that, do you expect an Isaac Garindo split with Jordan Mason, or do you expect him to maybe get more of the carries, less of the carries? Where are we at with that, Dave?
I still think Jordan Mason is ahead of Garendo in the pecking order. We saw Garendo getting some run after Mason got hurt. And he did look pretty good with the opportunities, but that was, in comparison to an injured Jordan Mason who wasn't playing like he did early in the season. I think now with Mason getting some time to let that shoulder heal up, even in the games that he has played the last couple of weeks, he's only totaled 8 snaps, had the bye week before that as well. I think that he's back to near 100%. And if he goes down, I think Jordan Mason is probably the RB2 here. But Garendo, it's going to change. Early in the season, when Garendo was still a very, very raw rookie, Jordan Mason, 81% of the snaps, 81% of the snaps, 75%, 75%. I don't know if we'd see that. We'd probably see, 60-40, 70-30 split, but I still lean Mason over Garendo.
Last guy on here that I want to ask about, and Jagger, I'll ask you this one. Khalil Herbert. This one's so interesting for me because the Bengals traded for Khalil Herbert, have not really used him whatsoever. And I'm curious as to how long this lasts where Chase Brown is getting 100% of the running back touches on this team, because the Bengals offense looks good despite the loss last week to the Chargers. The offense looks good, and this role is undeniable for Chase Brown. I just don't know how long it lasts.
I don't know how long it lasts either, and I keep looking stupid. So let's just be like quite honest, because like everything that I thought I understood, Khalil Herbert is the best running back on that team, but Chase Brown is explosive, and I think they're okay with what he's giving them. So I think Khalil Herbert is a one injury away guy because clearly everything after Chase Brown just isn't very good. But I definitely have tried to get off my take lock of Chase Brown isn't as good as apparently uh, he
Zach
actually
Taylor
is. I'm
thinks
just
he
wrong.
is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
No,
I don't get it. Like he's Zach Taylor's Kyron Williams.
yeah. I mean, I think Chase Brown is a pretty good player. He's got the explosive abilities. He can break tackles. He can catch the ball. It's just crazy. I mean, 100%
Yeah,
backfield opportunity share in 3 straight weeks. And I mean, the one touch that Khalil Herbert had technically was listed as a Joe Burrow fumble. So like that doesn't even count as a touch for Khalil Herbert. Khalil Herbert literally has 0 touches since joining the team. Um, I thought that he'd carve out a role similar to what we saw early in the season with Zach Moss, but apparently that fumble is still in Zach Taylor's head because he's not getting those touches. One other guy I'll shout out though, and you didn't put him on the list here, is Cam Akers. Talked about him 2 weeks ago on the waiver show. Talked about him yesterday again, I believe. But he is starting to carve out a much bigger role than I think anybody expected. It was a 60-40 split last week with Aaron Jones. And that, Aaron Jones was off the injury report. It's not like he was hampered by injury. If you look, he was still playing in garbage time in the fourth quarter. So Aaron Jones is clearly healthy. They're just starting to reel his workload back a little bit, and Cam Akers has looked pretty good. And again, we start looking at upcoming schedules. Minnesota has the fifth best remaining schedule, but in weeks 15, 16, and 17 against Chicago, Seattle, and Green Bay, those are all plus matchups. So not only is Cam Akers strictly a stash, but if we see him come out again with this kind of 40% role that he had last week, then we're looking at him as a weekly flex play where you can plug him in even if Jones is healthy. And if Jones misses any time, then you're looking at the really high upside. So Akers is still available in like 80 something percent of leagues, and he's somebody worth picking up too.
All good things, all good names. I like this. We went through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 11 different running backs to stash for the fantasy playoffs. Hopefully this was helpful for you guys, those of you who are vying for a playoff spot, or you're pretty much in and you're just looking for some good bench depth to add there. Hopefully this was a big help for you. Jagger and Dave are going to be back again tomorrow with the week 12 starts and streamers. And then Dave on Friday will be with Jeff, giving you the news and injury updates from the week on the audio side. So if you're not subscribed to the podcast on Apple or Spotify, make sure you subscribe over there for those Friday injury updates. And then Sunday morning, we have the live start sit show where we've got Joey Wright, Jagger May, Jeff Bell, Adam Hutchison, and the whole slew of Football Guy staff members there answering your questions before the big games on Sunday. As always, I want to thank you guys for watching and listening all the way through. For myself, for Dave, for Jagger, we'll see you next time. Adios.